Hey guys, how's it going? It's Krista, and today I wanted to try something a little bit different. To decide the colors that I'm going to use for this card today, I decided to type out every type of distress product in every color that I had on little slips of paper and let chance decide which colors I use to create a card. The reason that I decided to let chance decide was because I realized that I was using a lot of the same colors and color groups in my cards, and I really wanted to stretch my creativity muscles. So you have to take it on a little bit of trust that I'm not looking as I pick these slips of paper from the bowl. I'm trying to go mostly by feel to make sure that I only have one slip of paper. And for today's challenge, there are some rules that I'm holding myself to. One, I can only use the products that I pick from the bowl. Two, I can't use any colored specialty paper. Three, no extra embellishments are permitted. And four, I have to use all of the colors that I pull from the bowl. And let's see what colors we have to work with today. First off, I have Salty Ocean in Distress Ink, Wilted Violet in Distress Ink, Abandoned Coral in Distress Ink, and finally, Tumbled Glass in Distress Oxide ink. Most of these colors are within my wheelhouse of regularly used products. However, Abandoned Coral is one that I don't use often, so it should be interesting to see how this pans out. I'll start off today with two pieces of watercolor paper. This is Strathmore Cold Press 140 pound watercolor paper, and I cut a large sheet down to size, the approximate size that I'll need for this project. Starting with the first piece of watercolor paper, I'll go ahead and press some Distress Oxide Tumble Glass onto my glass mat and add a little bit of water using a spray bottle. I'm pressing the smooth side of the paper into this mixture. I'll go ahead and pick up some of that pigment. And in between each time I dip the paper, I'll make sure to dry this paper with a heat tool. The watercolor paper didn't seem to become as saturated as I would have hoped, so I opted for one dip to press the oxide ink onto the glass mat and press the paper directly into that mixture, moving the paper back and forth as it moves through the pigment. This technique did leave the paper more saturated. I did opt to add some water to the mixture after the pigment was transferred to the paper just to provide some movement. Once I dry that with a heat tool, I'll go ahead and add some oxide ink to the glass mat. This time I'll add the water using a spray bottle and pick it up using a paintbrush. I'll then tap that paintbrush against a acrylic block to create little splatters on the background. And just to have a little bit more variation, I'll go ahead and press some of that Salty Ocean Distress ink onto the glass mat, spray it with a water bottle. I'll go ahead and pick up that mixture with a paintbrush and tap the paintbrush against the acrylic block, creating splatters of Salty Ocean Distress ink on the background. Because I was using two tones of blue, I did not opt to clean the paintbrush between the Tumbled Glass and Salty Ocean inks. And I'm happy now with this, what will be my background, so I'll make sure to dry it thoroughly with a heat tool and set it aside. Moving on to the second piece of watercolor paper, I'll take the Abandoned Coral, Salty Ocean, and Wilted Violet Distress inks and press them against the glass mat in a fairly random pattern before adding some water with a spray bottle. Taking the second piece of watercolor paper, I'll press the smooth side into this water and ink mixture. I chose not to dry the watercolor paper between every single dip because I wanted the colors to move together a little bit. And once I was happy with a little bit of movement, I went ahead and dried that with the heat tool before adding more ink in the same way, making sure that as I press those ink pads against the glass mat, that they're placed down in a fairly random pattern. To add some continuity between the two pieces of watercolor paper, I'll go ahead and place each of the distress inks individually onto the glass mat, mix it with a little bit of water. I'll then pick up that mixture with a paintbrush, tapping that paintbrush against an acrylic block, creating splatters on the second piece of watercolor paper. For this piece of watercolor paper, I want to make sure that the paintbrush is cleaned between each of the colors to prevent a brown or sort of gray color forming. Once I'm happy with that, I'll go ahead and dry this piece of watercolor paper thoroughly with a heat tool. And off camera, I will run these through the laminator. I have a Mink, and I'll run them through the laminator on the first setting just to straighten out the pieces of paper a little bit to create a neater final product. With both of those pieces of watercolor paper dried, I'll start with the background. And using the largest rectangle from Simon Says Stamp Basic Rectangles die set, I'll die cut a rectangle from the blue background, which will also end up being a mat for my card. This rectangle is about 5.5 inches by 4.25 inches. For the second piece of watercolor paper, I'll use the Simon Says Stamp Floral Card Front Wafer die. The rectangle of this color plate does end up being a little bit smaller than the rectangle I previously die cut, and that was done intentionally to create a little bit of a mat with the blue inked paper. With that piece of paper run through the die cut machine, I'll go ahead and poke out all of the little negative spaces. I can save these pieces of paper for another card. With those negative spaces cut out, to adhere them together, I'll use some Tombow liquid adhesive. And I want to make sure that the adhesive is around the entire rectangle as well as around each of the petals, the butterfly, as well as the butterfly antennae. For the sentiment, I chose You're All Things Wonderful from Hero Art's You Sparkle stamp set. And to add that sentiment, I'll use a stamping tool today. This is a Stamp Perfect stamping tool. And after finding the alignment of You're All Things, I went ahead and picked up that stamp with the stamping tool. I chose to use a piece of washi tape to mask off Wonderful. Alternatively, you can cut the stamp between Things and Wonderful. For me, this is a rather permanent change, and I can't bring myself to destroy stamps, but it's definitely an alternative to the masking tape. The first stamp wasn't as dark as I would have liked, so I went ahead and inked up that stamp again. And just with my finger, I wiped off the distress ink from the tape. In this case, if a little bit of ink were to get on the background, it wouldn't be a big deal because that color is already incorporated into the background as well as the cover plate die. And after cleaning off that stamp, I removed the stamp from the door and repositioned the stamp for Wonderful under You're All Things. And once I found the position that I was happy with, I went ahead and picked up that stamp with the stamp tool door. This time I'll mask off Things before inking up Wonderful with Wilted Violet Distress ink. And before closing that door over, I'll remove the tape this time. Close that door over and press it down. And just to give that sentiment a little bit more saturation, I'll go ahead and ink up that stamp again before pressing it over for the final time. And to complete this card, I'll adhere the card front to an A2 card base using Tombow Permanent Tape Runner. That concludes today's card challenge. Remember, you're all things wonderful. Thanks for stopping by. Bye for now.